Hi everyone, welcome back to Sad to Savage, and today we're discussing traumas and identifying triggers and how to heal your trauma. So my name is Joy and I am a Master Reiki healer, and here today with me are my friends sharing this topic and giving their viewpoints on how to heal your traumas.
Hi, I'm Nichet.
Hi, I'm Candace.
And I'm Caitlin.
So in today's topic, we want to talk about trauma. We want to discuss in how do you recognize when you're being triggered by your traumas, coping with it, understanding it, and what are the primary triggers that are creating those emotions that could be heavy, that could make your chest, your heart start racing. And it's like you have the sharpness of breath, right? So it's like a lot of the trauma or triggers that induce trauma or trauma triggers, they're more so identified by more emotions.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I feel like too, a lot of people, when you say trauma or when you say things like triggers, people are thinking like on a grand scale, like, drug triggers or anger triggers or,
just the
traumas
word trigger
like
is a trigger.
And it doesn't always have to be that big. I mean, of course, like we've all dealt with some major traumas in our lives, which I know we're going to get into. But sometimes traumas are very small and very subtle. And you get triggered in very small and subtle ways. So, the way a teacher said something to you and then someone says something as an adult and it sends you down the spiral of self-doubt. And people don't necessarily think like, oh, I was traumatized, but it can be small things too. I think that's important to recognize,
Yeah, absolutely. I think the small things, just to give an example, right? So as I was younger, I always had a problem with rejection. I always felt rejected. Like, I was always trying to be like this.
Like by family, by friends?
Yeah, everyone. I felt like everyone. So the thing about trauma and our triggers is that it's completely disproportionate to what is reality, right? And so for just a little act of rejection, so for example, even though I was a tomboy growing up, I actually was prone to crush crazy, I was like crushing on everybody, right? I was just running around, just like falling in love so easily, right? And so for me, I always felt like I was not, accepted. Like they didn't like me, they didn't reciprocate, so I always felt rejected. And so as my trigger, it could be like for somebody that I'm talking to, like just like say for example I'm dating, right? And if my significant other or my potential other doesn't respond to me, takes like 4 hours to 24 hours to respond via text, that could bring back the trigger of feeling rejected
when you were little.
Exactly.
And
so
then you have to recognize.
Yes, exactly. So it could be on a small scale of that, and then it could also also be from a very traumatic experience where just many small triggers build up to where you end up having that panic attack and having the feelings of maybe depression or
anxiety.
PTSD.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think I believe it is Eric Erickson, who is the 7 stages of development, and speaks about through our childhood all the way up until adult years, the specific things that we need to learn in order to pretty much just be happy or just to feel self-confident or just to feel good in our own skin and everything like that. So if we miss those stages of development, that's where the trauma comes from. That's where the triggers are.
And is that like, because I don't know if I'm familiar with his 8 things, so is it, things like a home and feeling like you're provided for, like you have a safe space, so on and so forth?
Yeah, and it starts with like, or as soon as you start in the womb, you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's already, the first thing that comes, that's developed is the senses. I believe it's in the middle is when sound comes, you know what I mean? But already, just from experience, watching from the outside, I should say, especially with women and they're going through their pregnancies, that the feeling and the connection that they have with the child,
it like starts almost immediately.
It starts immediately. That's how the child will know, oh, I'm going to be a light sleeper, or I'm going to be a heavy sleeper, or what's going on with mom right now? Because if she has that cortisol and that stress through her body, she's pumping it in through the child.
And I don't think that's what people think about. Like, it does start from the very beginning, because if we feel it, right? If we feel just you find out you're pregnant, anxieties hit, right? Oh, am I ready for this? Am I excited for this? Am I whatever you feel, it's going through the body, so it has to be felt internally. Yeah. Even though we wouldn't think that from that point of view, because a baby doesn't come out the womb like, you were giving me stress in there.
Yeah. Right.
But that's the reality.
Yeah. Right. And not only that, though, then they start protective mechanisms right out the womb. You're coming out the womb and you're like, how they say, oh, it's a mama's boy. No, that's not necessarily a mama's boy. That mom, that child has some attachment issues. You know what I mean?
I think they say that's why skin to skin is so important. If the child comes out and they don't give skin to skin contact right away, that does affect the child's feeling of belonging for like ever. It's like that skin to skin matters right away. So that's why even bloody blue, it's going on your chest.
Yeah.
It's important. It's that feeling of like, hey, you're here and we got you. Like, welcome.
Yeah.
And people don't. I don't think everyone notices that. If your kid had an emergency at birth and immediately they had to start performing, it will stick with them, even if they don't have that conscious memory, like they didn't have skin to skin contact, and they've done studies where that matters long term.
Yeah.
So it's bigger than we realize.
Those are definitely traumas. And so for me, I actually got into a really serious car accident about 6 months pregnant, and I lost a baby. And so then we got pregnant, 6 months later down the line, and instantly I went into this panic mode, like, oh my gosh, like what if this isn't meant to be and I can't keep this baby? What if something happens? And so for me, a lot of my trauma is adulthood trauma. It's as an adult, I'm dealing with these past things that I'm nervous about, and I'm now concerned that I'm passing this on to him. So I had to do a lot of yoga and a lot of mental breathing and stuff to calm myself, so that I'm not passing.
It was like an at-risk pregnancy, and then there's stress.
Yes, and so unfortunately, you get a lot of trauma in adulthood that you can pass on. So you have to be really careful and know that.
Kind of goes into, you had a situation, it was happy, something happened that you couldn't foresee.
Yes.
And as an adult, once you realize how little control you really have in life, like, let's face it, I know that we like to plan our days and plan our months, but when things like that happen, that's one of the big reminders. Right. Look at this last year. Exactly. There's so many things out of our control, and then fear really does creep in.
It does.
As a kid, sometimes you do have that, more carefree, I'm not responsible for something, and then you get the responsibility of it, and you're like, oh, this is why all the adults around me were stressed about whatever it may be, right?
Yes.
And that's one of them. You really cannot control a car accident. That's why they're called accidents, And then all of a sudden now you have this great new opportunity, but instead of being able to be in the moment and be in that opportunity, you're worried about what happened with the past opportunities that were similar.
Yeah.
And now how are you going to let that affect this one, though,
exactly.
Right? It's good that you could recognize that, though, because then, it's like now you're stressed, baby's stressed, you should be enjoying that. That is your time to bond, literally just you two, And most people don't recognize that, right? They take the stress and they keep living with it, and it makes things worse because you're thinking about coulda, woulda, shoulda. You don't know what's going to happen.
Exactly, you don't, and the best you can do is recognize it, because I think if you can recognize these past traumas or these things that keep reoccurring, you're able to heal from that a little bit easier. You're able to kind of go in a different direction, take a different path, and that's the hardest thing to do, I think.
I think that part comes, though, from your childhood and how you were raised, because a lot of stuff that I learned, I didn't realize, even growing up in a single family home, even though they made it seem like there was no problems. You know what I mean?
Like your dad's not around, not a big deal. We got this.
They kept the childhood, you're a child, so you should be a child. Enjoy your childhood. So for the most part, I did enjoy my childhood. But this, once I started, teenage years, hormones, when you start looking from the outside in or going to your friend's house and stuff like that, then those things start to creep up. but you may not realize it because the way that your family treats you or the way things are taught to you. Exactly. So then you have to wait until you're an adult to start recognizing those traumas, or at least you was like, darn, I could have learned this at sometimes. Don't we have this feelings like I could have learned this at a young age had my mom, had my dad displayed these kind of actions, you know what I mean?
Just sat down and like told me, like what was going on, so that I had that. It's like to make an educated decision or to make the educated choices moving forward in life. But
or just our actions
protecting us, and so as protection, I'm not gonna let her know that she's different right now because I don't want her to feel some type of way about not having a man in the household. But then you go to a friend's house and you're like, everyone has dads and they all have these man caves and there's beers in the fridge or just things that you're not used to. And then maybe you start to become jealous, or you start to just things that you weren't right, and it's not that you need to feel jealous, but now you're going to because you don't know why you feel that way, and then you realize later, like, oh, I never had it. Yes. And that's what
or even just communication, because I think communication is big. And for me, my mom would yell at me a lot growing up. So for me, when people are like, you got to speak up, you got to do this and stuff like that with communications, or like even just speaking clearly, like look right now, look, that's a trauma trigger right here.
So it sounds like a general consensus here. I think the number one way to heal a trauma is recognizing the triggers, right? Wouldn't we all agree on that? That's what I'm hearing. Awareness. That's what I'm hearing is awareness, labeling and identifying what our triggers are.
And maybe that's why you're so gung-ho on someone communicating to you about it, because how easy is it to recognize something if someone sits down and lets you know to be prepared for it, right? But the reality is, like, if our parents did that, we wouldn't really have traumas. No, like, really,
I think it's that part here too, is like us moving forward, like how you said, we're now the parents, we're now the adults, we're now the ones who have to set the example.
And you just change the momentum. You set a different tone, you set a different standard for what you want in the next generation, or what you want your family to be, or and I had the opposite. My mom would talk to me about things, but my mom had me when she was 16. So my mom treated me like a friend. So if I have this issue, why do I have this issue, this health issue or whatever? I was young, I was on drugs and drinking when I had you, like it might be, and we just had these open conversations, which other people would think is weird when I'd go to like a doctor or I'd go to like a conversation. I'd be like, well, my mom, was young and on drugs and drinking when she had me, so I have a lot of health issues, and and people are like, I just say it so normally, but she kind of prepared me for that. Like, I made a mistake, it is what it is. We're going to move forward with this together. And, my mom is, as wild as she is, she's one of my best friends, and we can have these open conversations. Doesn't mean that I don't have trauma and that I'm not triggered, but it was a lot more aware for me as a kid to be like, okay.
She prepped you for it.
I'm going to prep you for all the trauma that you're about to experience. But, we kind of need some of that.
That's a pretty adult thing to do at a young age, though, to start prepping your child for something. I can't even imagine how hard that is.
Well, I just think about now, I was like, these are the different things that I would do differently raising my kids that compared to how I was raised. One thing is communication and making sure to keep that open line just open, because especially with this generation now, and we have social media
access to all the information. Don't let them get it from unnecessary places, right? Get it from good sources that care about their well-being.
Exactly. Right, care about their well-being, because right now we're faced with self-esteem, right? These kids are growing up not feeling secure about themselves, not feeling loved, and they're harming themselves. And it's a big statistic.
And you mentioned childhood traumas, and you kind of mentioned adulthood traumas, and I think that kind of goes to show things don't ever stop. It's going to be an ongoing process of like learning, growing, dealing with these things. And I know that we each have specific traumas, which maybe, if you all have questions about traumas and triggers and you want to ask us specifically about things, we can kind of dive more into that. It wouldn't be this episode, but in the future, there are things that we're open to talking about and sharing and getting more into. But now, knowing like trauma happens in childhood, trauma happens in adulthood.
Yes.
What are some ways that like throughout a life you can stay balanced, you can recognize that after you've recognized the traumas, like what can we do, and what can our viewers do that is going to allow you to learn from it and grow so that you don't face the same problems, right? Yeah. So like for you, it was like, hey, I recognize I'm living this way. I don't want to live in fear. How do I change my momentum? What
Well,
are
as a
some things-
wellness coach and fitness coach, first things that I had to learn, was about healing. And the thing that I would do is when anything came to me, no matter what, and I still do this to this day. Anytime that life throws me off track, I'm like, what are my basics? We have 4 main basic things in our root, right? We need to make sure that we have food, we have our water, we have good rest, and we have movement in our bodies.
Yes.
And food, water, shelter. That goes same with like stress, reducing stress, sleep, all that kind of stuff like that. Yeah. So we need to just those have nothing to do with our emotions. You know what I mean? Those are just human, mechanical things that we can do for our bodies that at least will get us into some kind of momentum, some
Kind of like
structure.
the building blocks.
Right.
Eating the right food, drinking the right water, go
Right.
take a walk outside, go get on a walk.
Yeah.
The minute you do those things, you start to feel clarity where you can deal with each step better along the way. Rather than it feels like, oh, I have to solve this problem now. No, go take a walk, go
Right.
clear your head, go have a freaking salad, drink a gallon of water. Maybe at the end of that day, you'll have at least a part of the answer to move forward.
Yes.
Right. And then when you say clear your head, that's the second thing too, right? Now you have nothing in making noise in your brain. Why don't you talk to yourself?
Mm-hmm.
What is the conversation that's going on with yourself? Are you speaking to yourself negatively? Are you speaking to yourself positively? Because now you are thinking of a third person point of view. You have that inner, that inner dialogue to say, hey, what am I saying to myself? And how can I change this? And breathe.
Self-talk.
Self-talk and then breathe. Breathe through it.
Yes.
3 breaths is going to change you into the parasympathetic state.
Yeah.
So all it takes, that's a scientific,
Fine.
find. Yeah, exactly. So all you need is 3 breaths, and then you can start to change the mindset that you have. And the mindset's going to change your emotions.
Yes. So it starts with the root chakra, grounding, stabilizing your energy, because fear comes from the root chakra that's been closed or clogged.
And I don't know if everyone is familiar with chakras, but that's something that we'll definitely have to dive more
Yes.
into and maybe do like an episode for each chakra and how it kind of does correlate with development and growth and traumas and triggers, and we can keep sharing more with everybody.
Yeah, let us know how you feel. Thanks so much, guys, for joining us from Sad to Savage and on today's topic about healing traumas and recognizing triggers. If you have any comments or any ideas as to how you've coped with your traumas and your triggers, let us know. We would love to hear from you. So don't forget to subscribe, like, and share.